Have you ever felt like no matter how hard you try, your mind never truly stops? Even when the world around you is silent, inside your head, it's pure chaos, a storm of thoughts that won't give you a moment's peace. Worries, comparisons, doubts. It's like being trapped in a conversation you didn't ask to be a part of. I know that feeling because I've lived it. I used to think that those thoughts were me, that they were part of who I am. But one day I realized something that changed everything. That voice in my head is not me. It only pretends to be. And here's the scariest part. That voice was controlling my entire life. It made me believe that I am what I do, what I achieve, and what people think of me. But what if I told you that none of this is true? That behind it all, there's something far greater? I discovered this for myself, and now I want to show you. Not because I read it in a book, but because I lived it. Are you ready to start questioning who you really are? If so, stay with me, because what you're about to hear could change everything. Watch this video all the way to the end. Could be the turning point that transforms your life. Each moment reveals powerful insights to help you conquer fear and embrace your true nature. Stay until the final second and experience the shift you've been waiting for. Have you ever looked in the mirror and said, "This is me"? Maybe you pointed at your face, your body, or even thought about your name. But is that really true? I used to believe it was. I thought I was my body, my name, and even my accomplishments. Every compliment I received, I held on to it like a medal of honor. But what about when nobody was giving me praise? I felt empty. And that's where the ego works its trick. It convinces you that you are what people think of you, that your worth depends on the approval of others. Ramana Maharshi teaches something profound. The ego is not who you are. It's a false identity that makes you believe you are this or that. Think about it for a second. Who are you if we strip away your name, your job, your achievements? What's left? You're still here. That's proof that the ego is just a shell, a mask. But the problem is, we spend our whole lives defending that mask, without realizing that our true self never needed it in the first place. The ego hates silence. It can't exist without noise. Have you ever been completely calm, only for a sudden bad memory or a random worry to pop into your mind? That's not an accident. The ego is afraid of silence because, in silence, it vanishes. It's why it keeps talking and talking and talking. Have you ever noticed how, even when things are going well, your mind says, "But what if it all goes wrong?" That's the ego trying to survive. But the ego doesn't work alone. It creates characters. There's one version of you for work, another for family, and yet another for friends. Each version comes with its own mask. The ego wants you to believe that you are these masks. But let me ask you something. If you can observe all these masks, then who is the you doing the observing? The actor can't be the audience. And in this case, you are the audience watching your own play unfold. The ego's greatest trick is making you believe that it is you. It disguises itself as I so that you never question it. But here's the secret. If you can observe your thoughts, you are not your thoughts. If you can observe your emotions, You are not your emotions. You are the one observing, not the one being observed. Do you see the difference? So, I ask you, if you're not your thoughts, your emotions, or your masks, then who are you? And since we're talking about the observer, we need to understand how the ego keeps you distracted. It doesn't just do it with masks. It does it with a constant stream of thoughts. This is where we dive into the next subject, the cycle of automatic thinking. If you've ever found yourself replaying a memory or worrying about the future without even realizing it, then you've felt the power of this cycle. The cycle of automatic thinking. If I asked you to stop thinking right now, could you do it? I tried it many times, and it felt impossible. The moment I'd think, okay, I'm not going to think anymore, another thought would sneak in out of nowhere. Has that ever happened to you? That's not random. That's the ego operating on autopilot. It doesn't want you to have control. It wants to control you. And the easiest way it does that is by keeping a never-ending stream of thoughts running through your mind. The ego is like a hamster running on a wheel. It spins and spins, but never actually goes anywhere. Have you ever felt like you were stuck in a cycle of repetitive thoughts, replaying past mistakes or worrying about the future? That's exactly how it works. The ego throws a painful memory at you, and before you know it, you're fully caught up in it. Then it shows you a scary possibility about the future, and suddenly you're filled with anxiety. The wheel never stops turning. And here's the worst part. The ego does all of this without you even noticing. For years, I thought this was just normal, that everyone lived like this. But when I started paying attention, I realized something powerful. I am not my thoughts. I started asking questions like, where did that thought come from? Or who is thinking this thought? When you ask those questions, something shifts. The ego loses its grip. It thrives in unconsciousness, but the moment you become aware, it starts to lose its power. What's wild is that the ego doesn't need anything new to trap you. It doesn't need to create new fears or new problems. It just replays the past. It replays old mistakes, old heartbreaks, and old regrets. It convinces you that the past is still present, but it's not. The ego also makes you live in the future, filling your mind with what if I fail, or what if I'm not good enough. But let me ask you, can you control the future? No. So why does the ego convince you that you need to obsess over it? The way out of this cycle is simple, but it's not easy. Here's what I did. I started watching my thoughts instead of getting caught in them. I imagined my thoughts like cars driving down a road. Each car, each thought would pass, but I wouldn't get in. I would just watch them go by. When you do this, the ego panics because it realizes it no longer has control. The CIA wants you to chase every car, but when you don't, the noise starts to fade. Slowly, the wheel stops spinning. But here's where things get tricky. When you start to step out of this cycle, the ego plays another card, the need for validation. It tells you that without the approval of others, you are nothing. It makes you crave likes, comments, compliments, and applause. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about next. How the ego makes you chase validation, like it's the key to your worth. The need for validation. Why do we crave acceptance so much? Have you ever stopped to think about that? I have. For a long time, I lived trying to be good enough, for other people. I would do things just to hear, "You did a great job," or "You're amazing." But let me ask you, how long does that feeling last? For me, it would fade quickly, and then I'd be chasing the next compliment. This is one of the ego's sneakiest tricks. It feeds on external validation. The ego convinces you that you need other people's approval to be worthy. It whispers in your mind, "What will they think of me? Am I doing enough to be noticed?" This is why we obsess over how we look, what we post on social media, and how we come across to others. It's not you doing that, it's the ego. It knows that as long as you're chasing validation, you'll never look inside yourself. You'll always be looking for something out there. The truth is, the validation you're chasing is like trying to fill a cup with a hole at the bottom. No matter how much water you pour in, it's never enough. And the reason for that is simple. You're trying to fill a spiritual void with something external. It doesn't work. Ramana Maharshi teaches that when you discover your true self, you no longer need outside approval. Why? Because the true self isn't looking for validation. It already is whole. The ego, however, will fight this realization. It'll tell you that you need more likes, more compliments, more followers. But think about this. What happens when you stop chasing it? At first, it feels like something is missing, like you're doing it wrong. But eventually, you realize that peace doesn't come from outside, it comes from within. You start to feel complete, not because people praise you, but because you've stopped needing them to. This need for validation isn't just about social media or compliments. It shows up in our jobs, our relationships, and even our daily decisions. How many times have you said yes to something you didn't want to do just to avoid disappointing someone? That's the ego pulling the strings. It makes you think, if I say no, they'll think I'm a bad person. But that's a lie. The true self knows its worth isn't tied to anyone's opinion. When you break free from the need for validation, something incredible happens. You realize that you were enough this whole time. You didn't need the applause or the recognition. But for that to happen, you have to confront another illusion the ego creates, the belief that you are your emotions and experiences. And that's exactly what we're going to dive into next. Identification with emotions and experiences. Have you ever said, "I'm so angry," or "I'm a failure"? If you have, you're not alone. I've done it too. We all have. But here's the thing. You're not your anger, and you're not your failures either. The ego wants you to believe you are. It takes every passing emotion and every life experience and sticks a label on you. Suddenly, you're not just feeling sad. You become a sad person. You're not just feeling anxious. You start to believe you are an anxious person. But is that true? Here's something powerful that Ramana Maharshi teaches. Emotions come and go, but the true self stays the same. Imagine the sky. It doesn't matter if it's cloudy, stormy, or clear. The sky is always the sky. Your true self is just like that. The clouds your emotions pass through, but they don't change the sky. The problem is, the ego doesn't want you to see it that way. It wants you to think you are the storm. But let me ask you, have you ever watched yourself feel angry? Who is watching the anger? If you can see it, then you're not it. The ego feeds on emotional identification. It wants you to say, I am sad, instead of, I feel sadness. See the difference? I am sad means sadness is who you are, but I feel sadness means it's something that's passing through you. It's not permanent. The ego wants every emotion to feel final. It locks you into roles like the angry one, the anxious one, or the insecure one. But think about this. If you've ever felt joy after being sad, that means sadness wasn't you. It left. You stayed. So who's the constant? This doesn't just apply to emotions. The ego also attaches itself to your life experiences. If you failed at something, the ego labels you a failure. If you had a bad relationship, it tells you I'm unlovable. But are you really unlovable? Or did you just experience a tough relationship? Are you really a failure? Or did you just experience failure? See the trick? Your experiences are things that happen to you, not things that define you. But the ego wants you to wear them like a name tag. Here's how I started to break free. I stopped saying, I am angry, and I started saying, I feel anger. Just that shift made a huge difference. It's a reminder that the feeling is temporary. It's like watching a wave come in and wash back out. You're not the wave, you're the one standing on the shore. The same goes for your experiences. They come, they go, but you stay. When you see that the ego's grip on you starts to loosen. But here's where it gets tricky. The ego doesn't just use your emotions and experiences to trap you. It also plays a more subtle game. It projects its fears and judgments onto the outside world. It makes you believe that your opinion is the absolute truth and that the way you see the world is how it really is. But is that true? That's what we're going to explore next as we look at how the ego projects and judges everything it sees. Projection and judgment. Have you ever caught yourself thinking, they don't like me, or that person is so selfish? It feels real, doesn't it? But what if I told you that most of these thoughts aren't about them at all? They're actually about you. This is one of the ego's most subtle tricks, projection. It takes your inner fears, insecurities, and beliefs, then throws them onto the outside world. So, when you judge someone as arrogant, it's often because, deep down, there's a part of you that fears being seen as arrogant. I know it's not easy to hear that, but if you really think about it, it starts to make sense. The ego's entire strategy is based on keeping you focused outward. It points fingers, it criticizes, it blames. Why? Because as long as your attention is on others, you'll never look at yourself. And that's exactly what the ego wants. Ramana Maharshi says that the only way to discover the true self is to look within, but the ego will do whatever it takes to stop you from doing that. It's much easier to judge someone else than to face your own shadows, right? That's why judgment feels so natural. Here's the big secret. What you see in others is often a reflection of what's unresolved in you. This one hit me hard when I first heard it. I started paying attention to my judgments. Every time I called someone lazy, I asked myself, where am I being lazy in my life? Every time I thought, that person is selfish, I asked, where am I acting selfishly? And let me tell you, it wasn't easy to face those answers. But once I did, I realized that other people were just mirrors. They were showing me what I needed to heal. The ego also loves to label people. It says, they're good, they're bad, They're right, they're wrong. It puts everyone in a box and convinces you that your version of the story is the only version. But think about it. If you and someone else watch the same event, you'll both tell different stories about it. So, who's right? The answer is neither. Each of you is seeing the event through the lens of your own ego, your own projections, and your own judgments. Once you see that, you realize that most of what you think is truth is really just perspective. The key to breaking free from this is to start asking, is this true, or is this just my mind talking? When you see someone and think they're rude, ask yourself, am I seeing them as they really are, or am I seeing them through the filter of my ego? If you're honest, you'll see that most of the time, it's just the ego at work. When you realize this, something shifts. You stop wasting energy on judgments, and you free yourself from the weight of carrying all that criticism in your heart. But here's the challenge. When you stop projecting your fears onto others, the ego feels threatened. It doesn't want to lose its grip on you. So it plays its next card. Fear of dissolution. The ego fears its own end, and that's exactly what happens when you start to see through its tricks. In the next part, we'll explore this fear and why the ego fights so hard to survive when you get closer to the truth.